So if we go and put our weapon into the crafted kick, it will replace it with an axe, and we'll just show our weapon outside of the machine. Hey guys, welcome back to another Big Rook Games video tutorial. We are continuing our series on creating a clone of Call of Duty Zombies, and in this tutorial we are going to complete our crafted kick animations so that we have a working crafted kick machine. Once this is done at the end, this is what the game will look like. We have our crafted kick, and if we put a weapon into it, it will take the weapon, replace it with an axe, and spit out the weapon at the end so that you can pick up the weapon. It will also recede back into the machine if you do not take it quick enough. So we will be adding an animation, and we will be adding code so that the gun gets taken away from the player while it's in the machine. So let's go ahead and go back to where we left off last time so we can show you how to implement these features. So the first thing we want to do is create a cube on our Pack-a-Punch or crafted kick object so that we can reference the position when the gun comes out and is ready for the player to pick it up. So on the crafted kick object, I'm going to add a cube. And the first thing we're going to do with the cube is position it where we want the animation to start when the gun is done. So I'm going to scale this down so that it is smaller. We want the gun to pop out and hover there for a second and then gradually go inside of the machine, and eventually it will disappear so the player can't pick it up anymore. So to make an animation for this cube, first we want to add an animator to the cube object. And in our project window, I'm going to create animator controller. We're going to call this cube, and click on the cube in the hierarchy and drag that controller into the animator field. And to create an animation for the cube, click on the cube and open the animation window, and it will say to begin animating cube, create an animation clip. Click create, and in that same folder I'm going to name it cube movement. So now we have an animation window right here, and what this does is it logs all the movements we make with this object in here and applies that motion when we call it in the game. So if you move it at all, it will add a keyframe to the animation window. Since we want it to stay in place for a while, at 0 seconds we will have it at its default value. So at 1 second, I'm going to move it slightly out so it looks like it pops out of the machine at first. And so now we have that at 1 second, and we want it to stay there for a while. So if you click the over icon, it will scroll through the time and go to 5 seconds. And if you move it at all, it will keyframe that. And we want this to last about 10 or 15 seconds. So if we go out to 15 seconds, we can move it to our ending position, which will be inside of the machine where the gun will disappear. And so now if we click play, you can see it will slowly come out and then stay in one position for a while and then slowly recede back into the machine. And that's all we need for the animation. And we will just set the weapon's position and rotation to the cube, and it will move the weapon for us. So now we need to set up our animator. If we go into our cube animator and open the animator window, by default, it will have an any state, entry state, and our cube movement animation. So first we are going to create a variable in this animator, and if you click on the parameters button, we can add it if you click the plus button, and it's going to be a bool. And the new bool we're going to call gun upgraded so that we know when the gun has been upgraded and when it is ready to take. So by default that's going to be false. Now inside of the base layer we want to create an empty state, and this will be the default state that it will enter into when the animator is initiated. So if you right click on the entry button and select make transition to the new state and click that transition arrow, we can add a condition to where gun upgraded equals false, and that's default, so right away it will be sitting in this new state. Then from there we can make a transition to the cube movement animation by clicking the transition arrow and adding the same condition, but this time gun upgraded will be true. And so when we set the gun upgraded variable to true in our scripting, it will start the cube movement animation. And if you move over and find the exit button, we want the animation to end after the cube movement, so make transition to the exit, and again click on the transition arrow and make the gun upgraded condition to false. And we need to set layer as default state, so then the entry will go into the new state and not into the cube movement. So now we need to go back into the crafted kick script so that we can add our new features. And first we are going to add a few new variables at the top that we need to work with. We need a reference to both our animator and our animation. So animator controller and animation animate. And we also need a reference to the weapon manager script, because we will be modifying that so that we can pick up the weapon after we submit it into the machine. And call that weapon manager ref. And we also need a rigid body because we are going to set this to the gun rigid body so that we can display it in the game. Call that rigid body gun. And then we need a flag to check to see if the new sound that we play, because we will be displaying a new sound when the gun is finished, we need to check that that has started. So ding sound active, and set that to false. And first, in the start function, we need to assign each of our new variables. So for the controller, we want to get component in children, because that is where our controller is. It is on the cube, and the component that we want is animator. And do the same thing for animate. But just to show you the different ways to do it, we are this time going to do get components in children. And this will return an array, so we just need to index it at 0 because it is the only one in our children. I'm just doing this so you can see the two different function calls, and that is an animation, and you just need to index it at 0. And then lastly, weapon manager ref, and we need to pull this from the player. So we are going to say game object, find with tag, and have the player tag, get components, then get component in children, and it is of type weapon manager, and that will return the weapon manager script on the player. So now we have that reference as well. So after our little animation, which is about 3 seconds, we turn off the effects so the gun will be ready for the player to take. So we need to tell the animator that the gun is upgraded. To do this, we just reference our controller and set bool. We can tell it which variable to modify. Gun upgraded to true. And at this point, we want to take our gun variable, that is our rigid body, that we will assign down below, and set that active. So I'm going to do gun.setActive, which you can't do for rigid body, so we have to reference the game object. .setActive, true. And because we don't want the machine to be able to be used while the gun is out and waiting for the player to take it, we are going to move this in use equals false down into an else if statement. So we're going to add some more states to our if statement. Else if, let's say timer is less than 16. While the timer is less than 16, which is just a random amount of time that I've picked, but will work well because our animation is roughly 15 seconds and it starts after the timer is 3. We're going to update the gun's position. So the gun.transform.position equals weapon position. And we never defined weapon position, so at the top we want a transform that will hold our information of where our cube is, and we'll call it weapon position. And we will update this position with the cube position, and the gun will follow that same path. So then let's do another else if, which will handle if the player never picks up the gun. So we'll say if timer is greater than 17, which again is seconds, then in use equals false, so we can allow the player to use the machine again. We're going to set timer back to 0, and we can delete the ones up in timer greater than 3, both of those, because we want it to last longer. And then we are going to set the controller animation to false, the same way we did before. So I'll just copy and paste that and set that to false, and that will stop the animation from playing. And now we want to destroy the gun if the player hasn't taken it yet. So we are going to say if gun does not equal null, then destroy gun. And we have a sound effect for when the gun is done, and it's longer than 17 seconds, so we're going to stop that as well. And we are just going to get component of type audio source, and we'll just stop that. And we want to start our sound effect before the timer is done, because there is a little loading time and it dings after a small buildup of the sound. So before our timer equals 3, we are going to say if timer is greater than 2, then play our sound. And I believe we have a line of code down here that plays a different sound, so I'm going to copy that and paste it into this if statement, but we are going to change the sound to ding sound. And we also need to add that sound reference at the top. So call that ding sound, which is a public variable, so we can drag it right into the object through the Unity interface. And because we don't want this to play over and over each time, we need to check to see if it's been started yet, and that is why we have the bool up above that says ding sound active. So if timer is greater than 2 and ding sound active is not true, then play the sound. And then we are going to set the next if statement as an else if, so it doesn't run through everything. And again, because we don't want this running through this else if statement the whole time that it's above 3, we need to add one more checkpoint to see if the gun upgraded has been set to true. And if it has been set to true, then we know that this set of code has been triggered and we don't need to run through this if statement again. So I'm just going to get a reference from that variable, which we can say controller.getBool gun upgraded. And we only want this to run if the gun has not been upgraded, so add a not. And then moving on down the script, in our onTriggerStay, this is the part of the code that tells us what to do when the player presses E and they have enough money to upgrade their gun. We are going to call our weapons manager script, which we will add a function there to handle the craft a kick functionality, but I'm just going to add the code here so we have that in our script. So now we're going to open the weapon manager script so that we can add the functionality and tell the game what to do when we upgrade a weapon. So I'm going to create a function call that returns a rigid body. We're going to call this put weapon in craft a kick, and I'm going to pass here a transform so we know where to position the weapon. So what we need to do here is give our craft a kick script access to a gun and return that gun to it so that it can display it for the user to pick back up. And how our weapon manager works is each weapon has an index. So first we need to check what index the current weapon has, and to do that I'm going to add this index variable, and all we're doing here is taking our weapons in use, which is a variable that holds our current weapons. Weapons to select is a variable that holds which weapon you are currently holding in your weapons in use. We are going to get the component on the weapon because each weapon has a unique identifier set by the set weapon variable, and that is just an index so we know which weapon we are dealing with. And if we look at this other function we have called drop weapon, you can see that it drops the weapon into the world using this set of code. So we're just going to borrow this code and modify it just so we can instantiate a new weapon for the craft a kick machine to use. So here rigid body drop equals instantiate world models, and the world model that we're going to use will be the index of the weapon, which we have from above, and I'm going to change the drop position to gun position on both the rotation and the position. And because this is a rigid body, we want to set it is kinematic so that it doesn't get moved around by physics and gravity. So we can set that to true. Now when we put a weapon in our craft a kick machine, we want it to take it away from the player. So here I am going to use a piece of code deselect weapon, which will play an animation that we are switching weapons, and now we need to tell it what weapon to switch to. So we are just going to set our weapons in use and at the index of weapon to select, and we need to set that to something else other than the gun so it appears that the gun is taken away from the player. So I'm just going to give the player an axe, a melee weapon, while they wait for their gun to be done, and that is weapon in game at an index of 7. And to check what index a weapon is, if we go back into Unity and find our player object, we have all the weapons under the weapon manager here. And if we select axe and find the weapon index script, you can see set weapon is 7. So that is the index that we need to use in our script and why I put weapons in game at 7. And then last, all we need to do is return this rigid body to the other script so that we can control its position. So if we save that script and go back into our craft a kick script, we can now call that function. And we want to set our gun to the rigid body that it returns to us. Gun equals, and we have our weapons manager reference, and we want to access our new function, put weapon in craft a kick. So it should auto-complete that function, and we want to give it the position of our weapon position. And we don't want this gun to be active yet, because when the player first pushes the E key to upgrade their weapon, it will play the animation for 3 seconds. We don't want the gun to appear until after the crafting machine has upgraded it. So here we are going to set this game object, set active, false. And then we will set this active after our animation has played. And it's giving us an error because I must have selected the get components in children, which is an array. So just delete the S, and we don't need a reference index. And one last thing, in our if statement we have weapon position, but we actually need to call out the position from that weapon position, because weapon position is actually the transform. And we also need to set our weapon position transform as a public variable so that we can drag our cube object into it in the Unity interface, and it will automatically put that position as the cube position. That's all we need in our scripting. So if we go back into Unity and populate our scripts with our public variable objects, we can see if everything that we did is going to work. So click on the craft a kick object again, and I have a new sound for our craft kick machine, and you can hear it now. So we'll take that and put it in our script, just drag and drop it, and next drag the cube into the weapon position. So now if we hit play and see if our scripting has worked, we kill a zombie so that we can get some money, and press the E key, it will take our weapon away, replace it with an axe, and display our weapon outside. But you can see that the rotation is wrong on the weapon. We want it to look more flat on the side that you'll be viewing the weapon. So let's change the rotation on the cube, because that is the reference to our weapon rotation, and that should fix that. So if we go to rotation, we just want to rotate it 90 and 90, and let's see if that worked. Let's try a different weapon this time. So if we go and put our weapon into the craft a kick, it will replace it with an axe, and we'll just show our weapon outside of the machine where we can pick it up, or it slowly goes back into the machine. And our weapon still works. We can do whatever upgrades we want the craft a kick to put on the weapon, which is easy. You can just go into the weapon damage and change the damage. But that is it for this tutorial. We now have a working craft a kick animation, and it spits out a gun for us to pick back up. And next time we will be going through and adding a menu system, and we will be adding some music. I had somebody on Reddit that made some pretty cool music for this game specifically, and we'll be adding that as well as screens for leaderboards. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next tutorial. And if you guys enjoyed the video, remember to like the video. It helps get more exposure for these types of videos, and it helps us know what videos you guys like. So make sure to catch us next week. We'll be adding the menu stuff. We hope you guys learned a lot from the video. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time. We can see it takes our weapon away, replaces it with an axe, and shows our gun with the wrong animation.